Welcome, everyone, to our panel today. We are super excited to have you here and to be with you for the next hour. We look forward to your questions a little bit later, but we're going to go ahead and start. So today's talk is about culture. We all heard that a lot of camps last year had a really hard time coming back from COVID. We read and heard horror stories about people leaving and people not making strike and, camps falling apart, but there's a lot of good things that happen at a lot of camps as well. And so taking a minute to talk about how do you spell Burning Man? And it really is culture. So today we're going to talk about your campers, your culture, how to attract, how to acculturate, and how to incentivize your team to not only have a great burn for you as a TCO, but also for all of your campers and then every guest that actually comes to be at your camp. Today, our aim is to make sure that both new and mature camps are able to benefit from our diverse perspectives, from creating a culture to keeping it going and even into succession planning. So our group today represents a number of camps at very different sizes and maturity levels. Charles is our mod, and he's starting a new camp this year with about 10 to 15 people. Dakota's camp has been steady with 40 to 50 people, and her camp was launched in 2014 with a core group of friends. Marisa runs Thunderdome, which is, as we all know, big in entertainment, but it's actually smaller than you think, at about 70 people, and it's been running probably since the dinosaurs were on the planet. And then finally, Gerald, he's got a newer camp. He is a third-year TCO at Legendary, and he's got between 40 and this year 60 campers at his camp. And finally, myself, I run a relatively new sound camp. We started in 2019, and we have averaged between 50 and we're maxed out at now 100 campers at our camp. So I'm going to go around the circle and just have everyone introduce themselves quickly, and then we will start with some questions, and we are more than welcome to answer yours as well. Charles, let's start with you.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Charles. I think part of for me really just springboarding the conversation of culture, like really understanding what does culture mean and then how does it impact the camp, right? So for me, culture is really about shared values, shared experience, shared goals. For example, this year, one of the big key goals for our camp is to really celebrate cultural diversity and racial diversity on the playa. So, we're already in talks pretty early on to join the multicultural people of color neighborhood. And so that's going to be a core part of our culture and what we're bringing to the playa and kind of our mission. So that's really a big part of the direction of our camp, and really culture seeps through everything that we're trying to do.
Thank you. Marisa, introduce yourself.
I'm Marisa. I manage Thunderdome. First year of the dome was 99, and it was also my first burn. And I started managing in 2004, took a couple of years off of managing but not attending, and then have been managing consistently again since the late aughts. So I have a lot of thoughts on culture. I believe that how the group works together is far more important than our output. And I believe in that we are peers before the object when it comes to creating something for the event. I don't know what else.
That's good. Dakota, will you introduce yourself?
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Dakota. I'm the theme camp organizer for a camp called Coco Disco. We have existed in a number of different forms since 2014, but now we come and bring 3,500 fresh coconuts to the playa and play a lot of disco. And our camp has morphed and size, it has remained relatively stable, but the camp and sort of its ethos have changed over the years, and lots of learnings on, what that means for culture, what that means for leadership, how that then flows through the sort of roles and responsibilities of everyone in the camp. So thrilled to be here. And this is a pretty amazing group. Thank you all.
Thank you. And Gerald, please introduce yourself.
Awesome. So my playa name is Geode, and our camp is legendary playground of the gods. And it's built upon this simple idea that we're all divine, immortal, infinite beings, dressing in the role as humans. And our camp is dedicated to creating workshops and events and a place for people to share their gifts, right? Like the place for us to really just have a playground to offer our wisdom and our talents and our healing. And so last year we hosted over 40 workshops in our Temple of Transformation. And we're excited to come back and just create magic on the playa.
Nice. Thank you, Gerald. And I'm Hyacinth. I'm your host. I am with Sonic Soul Tribe. We are a third-year sound camp that supports art, music, and dance. We originated in Texas, but we have members across the U.S. And I'm here to learn today, just like everybody else. And I really look forward to the engagement and the questions and just hearing from everybody on our panel today as well. I'm going to go ahead and start. And this question is for everybody on the panel. Let's start at our core. What are we talking about today? And culture. So what does culture mean to you, Charles?
Sorry, I actually kind of answered that in my
you did, but we've got more people,
so
we're going to answer it again.
Basically, again, really for me, having we've been a burner for about 6-7 years, and really culture to me is, at least within the theme camp or within the camp that you're organizing, is really about the shared values, shared experience, and shared goals, right? What are you on the playa for? What is your gift to the playa? What do you yourself as an individual want to bring to Burning Man? Those all things collectively become the culture of your camp. So again, my example is that really for me, diversity, inclusion, that's a huge part of our camp's culture and what we want to bring to the playa. So it was great to, already start connecting with, for example, the multicultural people of color neighborhood, right? So that's a big part of how we define the culture of our camp, is the diversity side and kind of defining our experience as well, right? And that's going to be a key central guiding light for how we progress as a camp and how we grow as well. Okay.
And then Marisa, how do you think that culture affects our camps?
Thunderdome's been around for a long time, and we've had a lot of evolution of kind of ethos and who attends. So we started out from a bunch of motorcycle riding people who worked security in nightclubs, and it was the idea of we should bring a dome. We should have a Thunderdome. We should have a Mad Max theme because it is kind of a counterpoint to the other kinds of music and things that are happening in the desert. And as it's evolved, it's become so much more about the community. It was always about the people who were doing it, but our priority now is community. We have several events a year with the dome, and we have several events now without the dome, and we have cocktail hours, virtual cocktail hours for our crew, which is now international. And to me, our community is the most important thing, regardless of what our output is. So we could be, serving slushies. We could be not going to Burning Man. We could be doing something else. And to me, that there is no point in doing it if the community isn't vibrant and strong and enjoying each other's time. And then the offering kind of comes out of that. And the kinds of people we attract, it's well, I think we'll get into that a little bit more later, but we tend to attract the kinds of people who like to work hard and to enjoy being around each other. That's not to say everybody always gets along, but having that culture of we're going to work hard and do a fun thing and be inclusive and also evolve. The evolution has been super important. The types of people that come out and do this thing have slightly changed over the course of years, and being flexible with that is also very important as we think about longevity. This is our 25th year and our 23rd year on Playa. So we've evolved a lot, and being flexible and open and acculturating people as we go along is super important.
Yeah, that makes sense. Dakota, what about you? What's important for culture setting in your camp and at any size in different points of your life cycle of your camp? Because you're different when you start, just as Marisa just said, than as you are today. So how do you think culture evolves, and how is that important for culture setting across the lifespan of a camp?
I think, I mean, fundamentally, when I think about culture, at least vis-a-vis Burning Man, it's, how do we show up for each other? And then how do we show up for the rest of the community? And I think that sort of answering that question of how we show up for each other has to be the starting point. How do we all want to spend our time out there on the playa? What are the things, is it a camp where we do want to work really hard? And that gives us a great sense of fulfillment. Is it a camp where we want, sort of lower expectations and everyone have, sort of more freedom to chase different experiences? And those are both equally valid ways to burn. But I think, as Charles said, like shared goals and shared sort of understanding of how we want to be at this place and experience this and show up for one another, really important. For us, for our camp, I'd say there's been a few things that have been pretty central. I mean, the first is that I think we've chosen to make camp really, the center of a lot of our sort of experience of being on playa. We have dinner together every night, and everyone, almost keeps it as sort of sacred time. They come home, we have a warm, nourishing meal together. Everyone laughs. You get some fiber, you get some salt. It I think sort of helps and nourishes everyone in a lot of different ways. But I think it also gives everyone the opportunity to kind of check in with one another and sort of say, how are you doing? Where are you at? How can I show up for you? And so that's something that we've really kind of enshrined as being really important. Another piece has been around shared ownership. As the TCO, I want as many people as possible to feel like they are critical to shaping the camp. You see some camps where you get the sense that there's sort of a small group who put on the camp for everyone else. And that was, and again, that's a totally valid way to approach things. That was not the way we wanted to approach things. And so, it was very much, how do we make sure that everyone feels like they've got full ownership over the sort of entire experience and then the opportunity to plug in sort of whatever way they have capacity to in any given year. And then I'd say the last one, we have this pretty playful ethos, right? We bring coconuts to the playa, we play disco music, and we want that experience for everyone to feel light and non-onerous and fun. But I think we can only do that because the basic requirements for being a camp member, our expectations around strike, around leave no trace, around respect, et cetera, are really explicit. And so that's been a real sort of priority for me, is like, how do we make those expectations that might be explicit, so that everyone kind of knows what they need to do to participate, to be in good standing. And then it allows us to go and have fun and kind of put all of that behind us because we're all on the same page.
Awesome. Gerald, what about you? Where did your camp start defining its culture, and how does your culture define your camp?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I think the camp culture is set right from the very first conversation, right? So anyone that's thinking about joining the camp, they speak directly with me, and I have an interview with them to make sure that they understand the purpose and the vision of the camp, and that they're on board with that, and that they're the right vibe, that they're going to show up. And in that first conversation, we start laying expectations. We lay expectations that, hey, if you're going to be part of this camp, that means you're going to be contributing, you're going to be involved. Like, this is your camp. And we put that expectation upon them right from the beginning, that when you're in this camp, that means you're here to show up. And if you see a problem, that means you're the one to fix it, right? If you see moop on the ground, you're the one to pick them up. Like really creating that foundation. And then, like Dakota, we also create this expectation. It's like, you are free to roam, play, explore the playa, but there's set times where we're going to invite you, if you want to be part of this camp, to plug in and like contribute and serve. And so we have a team dinner, like a camp dinner, just like Dakota. And it's like like Dakota said, it's a sacred time, right? And when people treat it like that, then there's this unified energy and feel around that. And so laying the expectations beforehand, when we have a series of calls before the event begins, just to make sure everyone's acclimated, everyone's attuned, all the new burners know the ethos of Burning Man and also our camp, and everyone's taken care of. And then when we start, like, we have like a launch party, like a welcome, here we go, like at the very beginning of the burn, to get everyone integrated, and we make it a celebration. That's really important. And then we have like 3 rules that we lay down, right? And the rules create the foundation for everything. And they're ridiculous and they're silly, and that's part of our camp. But the first rule is, have fun, right? Like we're here to have fun. If it gets heavy, like that's not where we're not here at Burning Man because we want to work. We're here because we're here to really play, right? That's the only reason why we come. So let's make sure we have that energy, have fun. Second one is really important. It's like the no drama rule. Like we have a strict no drama rule, which means no complaining, no whining, no bitching, no gossiping, no talking about other people. Like we're a family here. So like show up with respect and integrity and no complaining. If you want to complain, great. You're kicked out of the camp. Go out in the middle of play. Go complain out there because we want to create that foundation. And the third rule is to have fun, right? And so with that, then all of a sudden, like there's this cohesive agreement for the camp that says, all right, this is why we're here. This is what our camp's all about.
Yeah, awesome. Well, so for our sound camp, you know, our culture is just to celebrate music, art, and dance. And that's a big, wide, broad stroke, but we all come together really with that in mind. And then we're also open enough as a camp culture to really appreciate internal and external shenanigans. And so that fun part is really important for us too. So, you know, we do an all-night dance party every night, but during the day, you know, our teams are messing with each other as like code compliance, and we're fishing for people with moop out with a fishing rod in the middle of the playa and giving people prizes if they're trying to pick up moop. So we just have fun. And most of it has just been brought up internally from the campers because the culture of who we are is just part of that. So it's really fun to hear everybody's kind of view on culture and how different that can be. And for everybody here, before we go to the next question, if you're a TCO or if you're a camp lead, ask yourself, do you know what your camp culture is today? And if not, how do you work on defining that? All right, so I'm going to go to the next question, and that is about the common themes that we hear from the TCOs, right, are that there's a lot of challenges about carefully growing your camp. Challenges with camps growing too large, too small maybe for the scope of work that needs to get done. Sometimes camps grow too quickly, and sometimes there's uncertainties about how to screen, interview, and acculturate new people into your camp. So what I would like to ask is, can you speak about your experiences, and some of you have touched on it now, just about how you handle your camp size, bring in new members, and really acculturating your team for your specific camp? Who wants to start? Dakota, and then Marisa.
Sure. Happy to go. So we've intentionally grown our camp very slowly. We started off with something like 30 people in 2014, and we're only going to hit 50 campers this year, 10 years later. And, you know, I'd say that as a theme camp organizer, it's really easy, it's certainly in my experience, to get overly ambitious, to every year want to do more with more people in sort of every possible way. You know, I can come back to this at some point, but, you know, I have experienced what happens sometimes with the downsides of like trying to do something wildly too ambitious. And I think, you know, in that regard, one of the things that we decided was important was to sort of think about, you know, rotating where we're leveling up each year. If we get more, you know, ambitious with interactivity one year, maybe we sort of like hold steady with interactivity the next year and decide it's the year that we can try and accommodate slightly more people. So for us, you know, it was really, I think, around thinking about how we grow the camp sustainably in lots of different ways, not just on the measure of how we grow the camp sustainability in terms of the number of people. We've also had very low turnover. You know, I was telling the group this in one of our rehearsals earlier this week, but I tried to compile a list of everyone who's ever camped with us over the years. And I think we've only had something like 70 total campers over that entire period. So, you know, on some level, I'm not the right person to be speaking to, you know, some of these issues around, you know, onboarding new people. But I would say that, you know, is for everyone here listening, there's real benefit, I think, into, you know, in keeping a community tight and close knit. It makes my job certainly easier. People know the ropes. You know, you don't have to every year kind of like be onboarding a huge new group of people. And, you know, I think it allows us then the sort of foundation to be really intentional about how that culture shifts and grows. In terms of interviewing people and bringing people on, what we've tried to do, is make sure that everyone is sponsored by someone in the camp. So there's a pretty formal process that we've laid out only in recent years for how someone, can be nominated to join the camp. But, again, being really, really intentional that everyone who joins is additive and really understands the culture that we're trying to build.
Thanks very much. Marisa, what about you with camps?
So one of the things about Thunderdome is that if you are camping with us, you're expected to do, so most people do the full 2-week run or 13-day run in the desert. You're expected to attend monthly meetings. You're expected to do pre-work. And at a minimum, you're expected to work 4 out of 5 of the nights that we're open. And that's being there for the full 3.5 to 4 hours that we're open, that the dome is running. It takes 25 to 30 people to run the dome. And we need to rotate shifts in and out. So we're not a big camp, as Hyacinth mentioned earlier. So we can't afford for people to take 2 nights off, 3 nights off. So when you come into Thunderdome, we have three statuses. We have full members, we have sponsees, and then we have guests. And sponsees tend to understand that it's going to be a ton of work. And if that's not what you're drawn to, you're not going to camp with Thunderdome, and that's great. It's not for a lot of people, and so that becomes its own filtering mechanism. Is that if that doesn't appeal to you, you're not going to be a good fit. And there are tons of other places to camp where you might be a better fit, and come visit us, right? And certainly guests are, you're not a full member. You don't have to work, but you're welcome to pitch your tent. That's a lot of the people's partners or their friends that want to come and hang out. That's an option. And so that tends to be its own filtering mechanism. And we implemented a sponsorship process some years ago, and we've refined it pretty well. So now it's, you can be sponsored in at any point. It's 365 days. You need to work with us for at least 1 full event. You need to attend meetings. Your sponsor, the onus is hugely on the sponsor. The sponsor is responsible for letting you know about meetings, is responsible for your behavior. I don't hear about behavioral fuck-ups from people unless they're full members. So it's fully the sponsor's issue if anything happens. And so it ends up being, people tend to not sponsor a ton of people. You don't want to be responsible for a ton of people. And we end up getting people who are a pretty good cultural fit. One of the things that we have to look for is, how do we attract people who are not already in our community anyway? And so we kind of were like, hey, if you love us and we just had somebody new in camp. Actually, we just had a sponsor introduce themselves at our Thunderdome meeting, like an hour before this. It was like, I saw your camp and I walked by and I loved it and I wanted to be a part of it. And this is something we love to hear. So if you end up just hanging out with us all week and getting to know people, then the odds are good that somebody might sponsor you if you gel well with us. And that tends to work well. And we do have, like I said earlier, we do have some international members now, but we grow very slowly. We're old, so we have had turnover in terms of, people go off and have kids and come back,
It's great though, right?
It's amazing. It's amazing. But yeah, we those two elements, the kind of work that we require, plus the sponsorship, keep the culture pretty tight and keep the membership pretty. We don't have a ton of problems with people.
Okay. So as a newer camp, and I, as a new TCO in 18 or 19, I came to the Symposium to try to learn, right, how to be a TCO and how to learn from some mistakes so I didn't make them. But the first year we became a camp, you get notified that you've been accepted as a camp pretty late in the process, year 1, when you become, a theme camp or a placed camp. And so I learned the hard way, because we're a sound camp, so we need a lot of people for our build, that just taking anybody that says they want to camp with you does not fit into any culture you're trying to bring about. And you can hit a lot of pitfalls. So we made a lot of changes after year 1. We start with making sure we know who wants to come back from the year previous and kind of filling out how many more people we need to fill our camp for the year before we open it up. And we do the sponsors like you too. We also look for specific needs that we may need And so if someone has a specific talent and fits our culture, then we kind of look at those first. Gerald, do you have anything you want to add to this, or do you want to move on to our second question in regard to campers?
Yeah, I think just having like a clear idea of what's expected and knowing how to communicate those expectations is important. This year, we're actually doing something different where we're just going to have a contract, right? Hey, if you want to be a part of this camp, this is what you agree to. And it's simple, right? You agree to at least 3 shifts of contributing to the camp. You agree to, you know, showing up for the camp dinners as often, like just like it's simple, but at least when the expectations are there, then people know how they're going to be measured, and letting them know that they're like, they'll be given a score at the end based on how they showed up. Right. And when people know that, then they show up different, right? They show up more responsibly and more connected. And I think that's really important. And then, yeah, just making it easy for people to win, and also knowing where everyone's at, making sure that there's clear leaders for the different roles in the camp, right? Whether it be the meals, or whether it be the energy systems, or whether it be the workshops, or whether it be like having clear leaders. So it's not all based on one person, because if everyone knows this is their camp, then they take ownership. When they feel like they're involved in contributing, then they're willing to be the problem solvers. And I saw someone comment, like ask this question about the no complaining rule. It doesn't mean that they don't bring feedback when feedback needs to be given. Like there are triggers and problems all throughout Burning Man. Like it's so rich with that, but the energy of complaining versus like looking for a solution are very different. And this is what we train people on, is like if you're only going to be talking about problem and bringing up the problem, then like that's not the energy we want in our camp. But if something's happening and you want to find a solution, then great, let's talk about it. If I'm doing something that's affecting you in a negative way, great, let's talk about it from the point of like finding a solution. And so it's more about like really creating a container for authentic and meaningful conversation to feel like we're all part of the same team, rather than feeling like there's clashes or disconnect within the tribe. Because I mean, Burning Man is the ultimate place to get triggered, right? There's always going to be a problem going on. And if people don't like really see that they're part of the solution, then it's really easy for the energy to tailspin and for there to be drama or friction or frustrations within a camp.
Thanks very much. Marisa, one last question about campers. As important as it is for all of us to bring in the right campers, sometimes the right camper no longer is the right camper. So how and when do you kick someone out of your camp, and how can that be possible?
We've had a couple of times, we're an old camp, so we've had to do this a couple of times. And sometimes it's a communal decision, and sometimes it's a very private conversation. The better the relationship with the person, the easier it is to have a private conversation about what's happened. But we actually had somebody do their thesis on us, on community culture, actually corporate culture, and what draws people to stay in certain kinds of environments. And one of their takeaways was that, and it's a very hard thing to actually implement, outside of Burning Man. It would probably be illegal to implement this in a corporation, but the world is watching who you let in your spaces. And if you let everybody say whatever they want in your space, if that thing is racist, you don't need to tell. It doesn't matter what you say about diversity and inclusion if you're letting those people exist in your space and feel free to say things they want to say. Who you exclude becomes almost more important than who you're trying to include. So if you say, no, we booted this person because they repeatedly said all lives matter, we automatically, not automatically, but had this experience where I'm trying to be very careful about about how I phrase things, but when you don't allow that kind of conversation, you are signaling that yes, diversity and inclusion is important to us. and even diversity and exclusion of we're not going to have transphobes, we're not going to have homophobes, we're not going to have misogyny, and we're not going to have racism. We're not going to allow those things. And when you exclude them, it creates space for, I've had people of color who have come back to Thunderdome and explicitly said, I am coming back because this person was booted. And they were very gently booted, but they were indeed booted and told why. So, and I recognize that corporations can't do this, but it sounds like a load of bullshit if a company is saying, yeah, diversity and inclusion is important to us, but we're going to foster and make all opinions feel safe. Well, all opinions can't feel, if you let all opinions feel safe, then you're explicitly making some people feel unsafe. And we don't have that.
Yeah. I'm going to jump to a question that just got posted. So we can have a sense of how many people that we might need to recruit from year to year in our theme camps. Could our TCOs here today on the panel talk about our average camp turnover from year to year? Charles is a new camp, so that he's not going to be able to answer us. My camp, since we'll be a third year on camp this year, we have probably a 35% turnover, or people who can come one year versus can't come another year. We're based in Texas, so it's really expensive for a lot of our campers to come out to the playa. So many of them don't go every year, but kind of roll on and roll back off. So we'll probably always have a 35%, 40% turnover. I'm just going to go down the line and ask everybody the same question. And Marisa, you're next on turnover.
I don't have the exact number in my head. But it tends to be 15, I think probably about 15 or 20%. Okay. And these are, I don't even know if it's turnover or just people taking a year off.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Dakota, you?
I would say, particularly now, we're kind of all at the age where lots of people have very small children. And so what we're seeing is people are now coming every other year, every 3 years. And so it's not so much that we have, I think our turnover rate is probably sub 5%, but we do have people who are, sort of on an intermittent cycle.
Okay, great. And finally, Gerald, what about you for turnover rate? I know you're a newer camp like me, so you haven't had as many years to see that.
Yeah, I don't have any perspective on this. This is just our third year.
Yeah, I totally understand. Okay, so let's move on to a question about longevity of camps. So Marisa is a great example of a camp can last a really long time, but we as TCOs, I think, our goal or our hope is probably for the camp to go on beyond us. If we're unable to attend or life happens, we want to see our camps continue on if everyone else in the camp wants them to continue on. So what does everybody today think about long-term planning and leadership and sustainability for camps? Dakota, you want to start?
Sure, happy to. So, I have a lot of thoughts on this one. So I think one of the first ones is that in order for the camp to be sustainable, you can't have people burning out. And it is very, very easy for people to burn out. I've certainly been very close to that. And I think that is why that sort of spirit of collective ownership is so important, is that if you've got a lot of people who all see this as their collective thing to build and sustain every year, you don't have one person, at least in a sort of philosophical sense, on whom everything hinges. In practicality, and Marisa and I were talking about this in one of our prep sessions, there's a huge number of things that, I think only exist in a TCO's head, unless you've done a really, really good job getting everything down on paper and kind of documenting things from year to year. As a TCO, you end up taking on, just like a tremendous responsibility for keeping all of the various balls in the air. And so given that, what we've tried to do is first get a lot of things down on paper and set up an actual org chart. It feels very formal on some level to have an org chart for a Burning Man camp, and particularly for a Burning Man camp that's not even that large. But the aim of that was to make sure that there were people who were sort of thinking about a particular piece of our work on a year-to-year basis. So for example, for us with the coconuts, figuring out a coconut supply chain and a cold chain for it is actually a rather complicated thing. And, you want someone who realizes where sort of all of the bottlenecks and pain points in that were, and then the next year they can keep it up. As we've improved things, as we've gotten to this point where a lot of people are starting to come, every other year, for some of the more critical roles, what we're actually doing is appointing 2 people. So for power, for example, we don't want someone every single year to have to relearn how to do load distribution. None of us are electrical engineers, and it's enough of a lift for one person to figure it out. So, what we've tried to do is have 2 people, they learn from one another. And if one person has to take a year off, they can do so. The one other thing I'll say around longevity is that I think it's just kind of important to keep checking in with everyone else in your camp around people's expectations of how long they want to keep doing this, and sort of what does a critical mass of people look like in any given year to pull the camp off. There were a few years pretty early in our history where we just didn't hit that critical mass. We had the sort of enough people who were saying, I'm just in a work has gotten particularly crazy, or I just can't put time towards this. And at some point, I think it's really healthy to be able to look at each other and say, this just isn't going to be the year that we do the big thing, or we're going to entirely go dark for a year. And we're all, those who want to go are going to go and camp with someone else. But we still want to bring this camp back together. And so take this as an off year and, sort of everyone reboot. Those have been a few of the things that we've thought about.
Okay, great. Gerald, what about you? What are your thoughts about long-term planning and leadership and sustainability of your camp?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to having a core of people that really are helping cultivate the vision and can distribute the load, because it's a lot. It's the most challenging thing I've ever done in my life to host a camp by far. And there's so many things that need to be figured out to be able to support, 45, 50, 100 people out on the playa and to clean it all up after. I had no idea how hard it would be logistically. And if it was just up to me, I would have burned out. I've been like, fuck this, right? I would have given up. But fortunately, having a core group of people that are all committed and sharing the load, that's really what makes it sustainable for everyone. And and then figuring out what systems work and what doesn't work, and doing it. And being a 3rd year camp, we learned a lot of things that worked great last year and a lot of things that didn't. So we're in that reinvention process, oh my gosh, okay, that's something we didn't expect. And so we're still trying to figure out how to systemize the process more and more, so it becomes more streamlined. But it's a team haul for sure. It's a lot.
It is a lot. And that's kind of my experience too, Gerald. The very first year we came out in 2019, we hauled 3 semi trucks from Texas, and me and my co-lead pretty much ran the entire camp. And it was so much, and I never left camp. And I was like, this is great, but this is not how to do it. And so we went to the drawing board. Of course, COVID killed us for 2 years, but it helped me really think about how to do things better in the future. And, now we've had, and Marisa and I and Dakota were talking about this, is leaders emerge, and you find the leaders that really need to be a part of that team that help you with the long-term sustainability. And you start passing that information on, right? It can't all be stuck in here. Like Dakota said, some things are going to, right? But as much as we can get out to empower our other leads in the camp, that gives them ownership, that gives us some space to grow and to have our own burn. And the only way we can continue long-term is to have a good core team of leads who see the vision and follow the mission and continue in a way in which we all dreamed of, right, at the very beginning. Marisa, what about you before we move on?
Yeah, I think about succession planning and that so much differently. And Dakota said something in our prep meeting that struck fear into my heart. She's like, "Yeah, I own all this stuff," and I'm like, and she saw my face. I'm like, "Oh shit, I own all this stuff." Like never. We've been around so long. I've never had to think about it. Just yeah, the storage unit is in my name. Yes, it's all in my name. It's like. And I'm like, I don't own a Thunderdome because, the group owns a Thunderdome. And Dakota's like, well, someone's name is on it. I'm like, shit. So, the bank account is in 2 of our names. And that's to me, that's like, so that if I drop dead, that camp is not left in the lurch.
Yep.
But in terms of succession planning, I started to do this because we had people getting really burnt out, and we do these 2 events back to back, Burning Man and Wasteland weekend. Wasteland is the last weekend in September, so it's like a turn and burn for us. And people were getting really burnt out in 2018, or 2017, and we did all this succession planning, like trying to overlap and get a 3-year training process so that people could actually take a year off. The things that are really important, like rigging, fighter rigging, which is one of the hardest things to do. You're up on the top of the dome for 4 hours, and it's one of the biggest safety concerns that we have. Like the fighter rigging has to be perfect. Other things don't have to be exactly perfect, and nobody's going to get really injured, but that kind of thing has to be perfect. So we have to really make sure. And I was thinking about, in terms of leadership, like, okay, who's going to be a good leader? And it was completely the wrong way to go about thinking of it. And you just said leaders emerge. And I think that one of my biggest lessons is that tasks can be delegated, but leadership cannot. And I could say anything I wanted about, this person's in charge now, and they're not going to have all the stuff that's in my head. They're not going to have the relationships that I have. They're not going to have that nuance. And other people will step forward with their own nuance and their own priorities. And that is beautiful. And that's one of the things that is wonderful about succession planning, is that you see people who think differently than you do, who would do things differently. And I'm not attached to how things get done. I'm not even attached if they get done. What matters to me is that this community remains robust and gives a shit about each other. Right. So, but I've really changed how I think about leadership and succession planning. And at this point, we have multiple people learning, and multiple people who know how to do multiple things and are training other people to do them. And my favorite moment is like when I watch somebody do something that I don't know how to do, and they're training someone else how to do it. It's a glorious moment, and it's happening more and more, which means that my time to like show up and be like, I had nothing to do with this, it gets closer and closer. And I think that's awesome.
Yeah. Charles, anything for you? You've been a part of other camps, and now you're starting your own. So what have you learned about longevity?
Yeah, I mean, I think
and/or spinoffs.
Yeah, I think that a lot of longevity and things that help with succession planning is transparency and accountability, a strong core leadership group, people that can do multiple things, are tied into multiple parts of running the camp, right? I think those are all incredibly important because, yeah, you don't want everything to be just centered on one person. I think that in starting this new camp, we are starting off as a pretty small camp, 10 to 15 people. Accountability and transparency are kind of the core of how I'd like to lead it. And definitely when you have a small group of people, accountability, it's hard to hide, and so I think that's a big part of it. Everyone, especially in the first year, gets to learn a little bit about everything, right? And I think that's, you start seeing who are kind of the leaders that are kind of stepping up. You kind of start seeing like who's more of a supporter, who can be technically great at certain things. And then you kind of, debrief after the burn and start really thinking about like, okay, if we're bringing this in the next year, what are the things that, what are kind of the people that most likely are going to stick around, what they have going on in their normal lives, those kind of things. It's all really a big conversation. But really just being very observant and having the transparency, everyone knows what's going on. They know they more or less can get tied into the budget, know how much you're spending, what direction camp dues are going. I think that's all very, very important towards us all.
Wonderful. Something that I thought about when you guys were talking about leads, et cetera, is that, our leaders do emerge. And Marisa, you were right when you said we can't just assign someone a leadership role. And I think a lot of us may want to do that, but what we have to realize is to have that leadership quality, you have to see that others want to listen and work with whomever has been assigned the lead. It doesn't matter how good someone is, if they don't have the capability to lead, then they can't be a leader, no matter how smart or industrial that they may be. There are just others that can get people to follow them through a cause or a task or a need. And those are really the people that we have to really look for within our camps that can and will become leaders today and tomorrow. Dakota, it looks like you had something else to say about it.
I was just going to pick up on something that I saw mentioned in the chat and that I think Charles just touched upon, which is around budgeting. And, some of the sort of questions around transparency around the budget. And I think that that's something I've seen so many really intentional, sort of camps in so many other regards really struggle with, and places where sort of tensions emerge. So, what we've tried to do, and I think this has become more and more true over the years, is let everyone know exactly where their dues are going. Like have those conversations around, what are the expenses? What are the sort of main drivers of the things that your dues go to? And to the extent possible, and I realize that, this is not sometimes like too much, decision-making by consensus is problematic, but to the extent possible, like give people the opportunity to weigh in on some of those, sort of more one-off or, variable expenses. And in particular, I think with that, it's important because, so much of what you're trying to do with the culture, can be undercut by choices that you make around the budget, right? If you say, we want this to be an incredibly inclusive community and here are all the things that we're doing to make that so, and then the camp is prohibitively expensive, that's not inclusive, right? Or, if you say we're going to spend money on X and not Y, and that only reflects the preferences of a certain, percentage of the camp, again, you just need to be really clear about sort of how all of those choices about money really are choices about culture. Similarly, we have our spreadsheet, it's available. It's a pretty simple spreadsheet. And most of these things now are pretty like basic expenses or things that, it's like we have to get the coconuts because that's the thing we do. But I do think it's just an important thing, oftentimes where I've seen culture kind of really turn into a conflict have been things around money.
Yeah. Okay. That reminded me of a question that was raised earlier from somebody in the audience today that asks us, how do you communicate the option to run fundraisers versus paying higher camp dues to support your camp expenses? And how do you assess which to do each year? What is the culture around dues and funding in your camp? So I'll start with that one, and then we'll see who else wants to add. But since we're a large scale sound camp, the expenses, A, coming from Texas, and B, just related to providing power, fire, infrastructure, the stage, the audio, the lighting, the lasers, the video, the list goes on. We have an extensive amount of expenses that revolve around our camp. So we absolutely do fundraisers, mostly based in Dallas, Texas. We've actually just expanded and we're moving into El Paso and hopefully soon Vegas. And so we're really starting as we get our teams and our groups of people that have camped with us for years, understanding, because we are transparent with our bills and how much we're paying and how much we have to fundraise to keep our camp fees low. So we also want to be inclusive. We're full of performers and musicians and builders, and we don't want to outprice our camp or our campers. So the only way we can do it is to have fundraisers to help us make money to help pay for the transport to get the stuff to Black Rock City. And so fundraising is an extremely important part of our camp and our camp culture. And we talk about it in the same conversation we're having about our budgets and what things cost us. Does anybody else want to talk about kind of the mixture of fundraisers versus high dues or not high dues for camps? Dakota?
Sure, can offer a few more thoughts.
Okay.
One of the things that I've noticed on this is that geography really matters. We have people sitting for the most part, I think probably about 50% of our camp based in the Bay Area, and maybe 25 to 30% in New York, and then the remainder kind of, spread around. And so when we have conversations around, fundraisers, and maybe everyone's like, the sort of expectation that everyone is equally participatory in helping to do the things off playa that make the camp happen, it's a really difficult thing to do with the New Yorkers, or with the people who are elsewhere, because we're talking about putting together an event in San Francisco, for example, and lots of people aren't able to sort of show up and contribute in the same way. And so one of the things that we've tried to do is essentially, because we're a small enough camp, have conversations with everyone about this is our budget. This is the shortfall in our budget. We're going to try and make up as much of that delta as we can, with a fundraiser in San Francisco. But for those in New York, does the New York crew want to do something different? Do they want to come up with some, is there some means that they want to participate? And then, at the end of the day, how do we not make it so tit for tat that those who, would be eager to participate if they're sitting someplace remote, but just happen to be remote, don't feel like they've short shrifted the camp. So again, I think it's as much about just like being transparent, having these conversations, and knowing that, everything that you do requires effort, and you should make that fun and should make that part of the community. Otherwise people start to feel, conflicted.
Disconnected. Yeah.
Disconnected and like overburdened.
Nice. So we all know how quickly tickets sell out, and we all know that we all get a certain amount of steward stealth tickets as theme camps. My next question is to everybody on the panel, and that is, we never get as many tickets as we need campers, right? Number one, let's just all assume that. And if I'm wrong, you can tell me. But knowing that we don't get enough steward sale tickets to complete our camp, what is your method for prioritizing whom gets the steward sale tickets? Because there's never enough, and there's always more that want those tickets than there are tickets to give, or to assign would be the better word. So how do you do that? Who wants to start? Marisa?
I mean, we got a lot of work to do. And if you've done it in the past, you're higher on the list, and we're pretty explicit about that. So if you're spending the full 2 weeks and you're a good worker, you're at the top of the list. And in order, it tends to go members of camp in good standing, followed by sponsees in good standing, or, sponsees who can attend for the full 13 days, followed by guests. And people tend to really understand how that works. Like if you've taken, 7 years off and you're like, oh yeah, I want a ticket, but I can only come for the weekend. Like, you're not going to get a ticket over somebody who is going to do the full run. And even weekenders generally, even if you're a weekender that comes every year, we don't, like I said this in our meeting, in our Thunderdome meeting this morning, I was like, we don't really do passive aggressive. We just do aggressive, or as I like to refer to it, just honest. It's like, hey, you don't contribute as much, so you're a lower priority. We have a camp to run. And it's a steward sale ticket. It's not a like, here's a fun time gift for showing up. Like it's very transactional, and that's okay. Like that's what they're for. You're here to build the city.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we prioritize our group, our core team that comes out for the full 2 weeks first, right? Because you can't have a camp without that. And then it's leads, and everybody, obviously everyone has to be in good standing. And then we go down to the people that have come every year and contributed to every year. And then we never have tickets for new campers. Typically, we find our new campers that have somehow got their own ticket. And that's really important, as well as for anybody that is returning that hasn't been in a few years, you have to understand you might have to go out and find your own ticket, like you said. And a lot of them are really good sports about it. Some people aren't. And we have to have those conversations too, especially as TCOs. Gerald, what about you on steward sale tickets and how you prioritize those?
I mean, I think it's common. Like it's pretty simple. Who's going to contribute the most? Who's going to make the camp happen? And like you know who the people are that are going to play full out, that are going to help with the bill, that are going to like really be invested, preparing for the camp. And I also, just from the years that I've been, I trust that we'll find tickets for everyone else that's really committed to going. Like it's sometimes like doesn't make sense how it's going to work, but like as a camp, like we're all working together. It's like, hey, if you're committed being part of the camp, we'll find a ticket for you eventually. But the steward sale is just really like who is going to be the heart of making this camp happen, and you'll know as a camp leader, you'll know who's a contributor versus who's a consumer.
Yeah. Do any of you all track volunteer hours to help you understand that on and off playa? Nobody?
I track who attends meetings and who attends, work days, but
Yeah.
that's the closest thing I do. And I definitely do that because it helps to determine who's the most engaged.
We do too. And that goes right back to acculturation, right? If they're not attending the meetings and just want to show up, they really don't have the backstory or the information about the camp. And really, when they get on playa, it's harder for people, if they haven't been attending those meetings, to really be part of the camp. And so I do think that's really important as well. Dakota, do you want to add anything about the steward sale tickets?
Yeah, I mean, just on picking up on GOD's comment around, sort of their eventually enough tickets materializing. Certainly that's been our experience. And I think when you have a lot of people who've gone for many years, everyone has friends and whatnot that they can speak to, and sort of eventually tickets appear. But one of the things we tried to really institutionalize is the sense that the camp is kind of going to facilitate that ticket exchange. So, for the steward sale, we say, we've got this org chart, sort of the people on that org chart are going to get the tickets. If we end up with, one or two additional steward sale tickets, and we've never had more than that, it goes to whoever is sort of that year able to show up early, able to like really, sort of level up. And then for the main sale, we've sort of said we'll figure it out. We can't make you, we can't make you any promises about when and how those tickets will materialize, but we do really try and say like, hey, if anyone in this group hears of 2 spare tickets, get them, and then like direct them sort of via the camp, so that we can have a full picture of who doesn't yet have a ticket,
Right.
and hopefully get everyone there. One thing I will say we've struggled with, and hearing everyone's comments, I'm curious your thoughts on this. By virtue of the steward sale tickets going to the people who've had longstanding roles, I find that it works against this goal of giving everyone, including new people, a real sense of ownership, because you start, you end up cementing, sort of this group of people who each and every year pick up the big tasks. And so I'm curious for the other panelists, how do you think about, how do you get sort of new people brought into the heart and soul of the camp quickly as it relates to, some of these big roles and then tickets and steward sale?
It's a good question, Dakota.
I mean, I can jump in and say that we have lots of opportunities for sponsees to step in over the course of the year. We need to build new padded boffer weapons. We have inventory days. We have meetings that you can attend. We have different committees. We know how engaged someone is before we get to Burning Man, and often before the steward sale.
Yeah. And that's really helpful, right? Anybody else for Dakota's question? If not, I'll move on to the next one. Okay. So to go back to where we started, we've all learned a lot in our time as TCOs and from each other. And I think the network of talking to people and understanding and learning from each other is super helpful for all of us. But we've also all messed up. And we've all had lessons learned. What goes up must go down, and we've all learned something the hard way, right? So fun times and past horror stories encouraged at this moment. Specifically, what horrible time have you had when you're really thinking about what's relative to the TCOs in the room? And how did you deal with that horror story, or what did you learn out of it? And did you change anything because of it? Marisa.
I'm perfect. So many. Did you know somebody once had to have a testicle surgically removed after fighting in the dome? I don't blame myself. That was my first year managing camp. It was awful and terrifying. All kinds of things, but my best example is something to which Dakota alluded earlier, which is I let one of our very best people get burnt out, and they were in a situation last year. So we tried to do all this training and double training, and then none of the people that got trained ended up coming back in 2022 after being trained up in 2018 and 2019. We had somebody that we were relying on for that fighter rigging who ended up getting very burnt out, and it was like, I felt terrible. They're a good friend. They pushed themselves and we all let them, and it was awful. It was awful. And I was like, look, we're not doing another event until we have at least 5 more people trained how to do this. We're not doing it, because I would rather not have the event happen than have this experience for somebody who worked so hard for this community. And it was a fuck up, and it was a recent fuck up, and we're still recovering.
Thank you for sharing that. Dakota, do you have any horror stories or any oh shit moments?
Yeah,
I know you do.
I definitely do. So this is a fuck up and an early fuck up, but I think something that has informed a lot of, the ethos and the sort of philosophy I've been sharing around growing slow and being sort of careful about how ambitious you want to be. I think our second or third year on the playa, I essentially delegated shade and infrastructure to a few really, really enthusiastic folks who decided that we needed to have the largest shade structure, maybe on the entire playa, and to design it as a single piece of shade. So I think it was like 100 by 100 feet, maybe 150 by 100 feet, 150 feet. It was enormous. And it was one huge piece of aluminate. And as you can imagine, that turned into quite the sail. And literally, I remember looking over at some point, this was also 2015, an incredibly, incredibly windy year during build. And I looked over and there were like 2 or 3 of my campmates literally lifted off of the ground because they were trying to get this piece of shade cloth lashed down. And instead they had been floated off of the ground. We finally got it down. It actually provided excellent shade, but by the time we got through build, everyone was broken. I mean, in a truly real way. We had, this wasn't even 1 or 2 people broken. This was most of the camp in tears and almost desperate just to get off the playa. And so for us, I think it was the next year, we all took off, or people went and camped elsewhere and just decompressed and said, this is not the beginning of the year that we force ourselves to work so hard that this thing isn't fun. And so I think that's really been the key lesson. We do this because it's fun. We do this because we want to spend time together. And how do we conserve that first and foremost?
Okay. Gerald, do you have anything you want to add about a horror story or lesson learned?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things. I was just naive. I just yeah, no idea. One simple one was generators, right? I was like, okay, we need some generators. And I had no idea how much power was required to come to the camp. And so we had everyone bring like these little generators, and it ended up being such a nightmare. And I remember this one generator was just like chugging along, like 12 hours a day in the hot sun. And one of the guys went to go like it just shut down. He went to go turn it like to refuel it, and gasoline just exploded like a geyser out of it. And then that same guy, once again, I'm like, oh, you just don't know. We had these tanks of water, and we had these tanks of gas, in a very similar looking containers. And we had like this like makeshift shower system we had, and the people were responsible for filling up the 5-gallon bucket of water for showers. And one of them mistook the water for gasoline, and filled up the 5-gallon thing with gasoline. And so the same guy who like the generator blew up on, he went to go take a shower, and it was gasoline that he was like showering on.
Oh my gosh.
Needless to say, he had a very bad day, not very happy. And I'm like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
those are like really obvious things once it happens, but you don't know until it happens. It's like, oh, okay, we need to have a better system for generators. And obviously the gasoline, we have it clearly marked so no one takes a shower in it. But it was like little moments like that. It's like, okay, mark that. That's never going to happen again, because you just don't know what you don't know.
Oh, that is too funny. Okay, I think we only have like 5 or 10 minutes. So I'm going to read off 2 more questions that we've already received. But for everybody that's still with us, if you do have anything else that you'd love to hear from us, please go ahead and put it in the chat, and we'll try to address it as well. One of the questions we had was from Maddie Clay, who asks, how do you as camp leads address important concern by camp members, i.e., if we say it's a no culture of no complaining and no drama, there has to be an avenue to bring up uncomfortable or inequitable practices. And so how do you work through that as a TCO and offer that for your campers? I'll answer it if nobody else can. Okay.
Yeah, I just want to say, I reiterate this, like we just have everyone be problem focused solution focused rather than problem focused. That's it, right?
Fair.
Like if you see a problem, great, come to us and let's find a solution. But if you're coming just to complain about someone else or like to like cause drama, then like, please, like that's not what we're looking for. Like if you see it, it's your problem. So come with a solution. Let's work on it together. Even if it's like friction with another person showing up, great, let's talk about it. Let's resolve it so that there's not any underlying, unspoken things. But when it's done through respect and we're all on the same team, then all of a sudden everyone gets it, that it's like a very different energy than backbiting or complaining or, just like whining about something.
Absolutely. Well, we had 2 instances last year, and other than that, there was nothing that I know of. But one was a group of people who had all driven in from Texas, which is a very long drive, and they'd gotten to the playa, of course, after waiting in line for who knows how many hours, just like everybody, right? When they started building, they were probably all hungry, they were probably all tired, and they just immediately kind of came at each other, right? And so the best thing that we could do, I have a co-lead, he took one of the people, I took the other, we took a walk all the way down I think, and back to kind of talk about, what led up to this, how can we do better in the future? And they didn't have any issues by the time they came back. But when you do get people in very specific weather issues, heat issues, cold issues, lack of sleep issues, you're bound to see some kind of drama or some sort of conflict. So it's not like it doesn't exist. And to Gerald's point, it's about how we communicate that so that we can move forward and everyone has a better understanding of each other and of the expectations of one another, and that we can all come back together to center, if you will, so that we can have the no complaining, et cetera. We just have to work through our issues. And I think to be direct with each other and respectful is so powerful. And we get to do that maybe more at BlackRock than we get to do at the default world. Marisa.
I just want to jump in and say that being in my role for as long as I've been in my role, people have for a while had a tendency to come to me rather than going directly to the person.
Yeah.
And, it's something that I am happy to do or happy to talk out. But I'm trying to re-encourage a culture of, hey, let's be direct with people. If there's an issue that you don't necessarily explicitly need me for, please do work it out directly with them, just because I think it cultivates a culture of honesty. And I think that anybody who's ever talked through, I know I shouldn't even say this, but anybody who ever has had experience with nonviolent communication, I know, but even for Thunderdome, using that language that we all know of the when you, then I,
Yeah.
with the people that we love, it makes us more robust as a community.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Dakota?
Yeah, I mean, I'll pick up on a few threads from each of you. I'd say certainly, this sort of trying to have a culture of developing solutions and sort of coming forward with, solutions rather than just stating problems, something we've really tried to do. I also, when people come to me, I usually try and quite explicitly say, are you coming to me, Dakota, as your friend, or are you coming to me, Dakota, as the theme, like as a TCO? Is this something that you just want to vent? And hence, like, I'm here and I'm like really happy to hear what's bothering you. Or is there a specific ask or something that you think needs to be, addressed? And if so, in lots of cases, my answer is that's something that you can go address yourself rather than that needing to come back to me. Finally, the last piece, and Hyacinth, you sort of hinted at this, but so often people need water, they need sleep, they need like the basics covered. And so one of the things that I've really tried to do is I have insane quantities of oral rehydration salts on me at all times. And when somebody shows up and they're particularly grumpy, usually my first thing to do is just like give them some nice salty sugary water, sort of sit them in the shade and like wait half an hour. And this is not to suggest that people don't come to you with problems that are like deeply important and do require, there are times when things are being raised that that are going to require really difficult conversations and, some action being taken. But there are also times when people come to you and, a tremendous amount can be done by just like making sure that they're meeting their own basic needs.
Yeah, absolutely. That made me think of one more thing. So we have what we call an internal code compliance team, and they wear 4-inch construction hats and their little jerseys, and they walk around with stickers that say up to code. And so as the campers are arriving and starting to set up camp, these two guys come around and they're just snarky and they're having a great time and they mess with people with pretend rulers and all kinds of things. But what happens is in this fun shenanigan is that they get to know every single person, or every single person really gets to know them. And what organically happened because of our code compliance was that if anyone did have an issue that they didn't know how to address, or they didn't know how to ask for it or look for it, they ended up going to my code compliance officers, who would then help facilitate whatever needed to happen, whether it was the shower's out of water, what do I do? Or, I had a comment by someone that seemed a little sexist and I really feel uncomfortable. And then there was this wonderful avenue for people to really approach things in a very holistic way. And that is something we're continuing because of how much good input we got from our polls after Burning Man. So anybody else want to talk about that? I know we only have a few more minutes, or are there any questions from anybody else before we have to go? Charles, how long do we have?
I think we got about 3 more minutes.
3 more minutes. Are we missing any questions then?
I think we have a couple from help desk. One of them is, how do you deal with campmates who have to leave for some unexpected reason? People having to leave early for seemingly good reasons and missing strike. Sometimes people have been around for multiple years.
Okay.
And then also the idea of,
let's stop there, Charles, and see if anybody has an answer, and then we'll go to the next one. Okay.
I think I would just say, when we're on the ply, we're all one team, right? So if one team member goes down, then everyone else, all right, how do we support them? And then how do we take the load so that we keep moving forward? And I think with that simple mentality, then no matter what, there will be problems. There'll be like so many problems, but when everyone's working together as a team, then you're looking out for your other teammates and you're like looking at the objective, and together, like it becomes like really, really, it becomes a good experience to watch how people show up and fill in the gaps, rather than something that like becomes like a challenge.
Yeah.
I think I remember this question, reading it, and it was like, you roll with it. People have good reasons to leave. We've had family, it's been decades. We've had every reason for people to leave. And culturally, people who are kind of flaky consistently don't like to come back to Thunderdome because it's not fun for them to feel like the flake. in a community of people who are kind of bonded together with working. And I don't just mean physical work, because we have people of all different abilities in camp, but like, it's not enjoyable 4 years in a row to be like, ooh, you had to miss cleanup. Like,
Yeah.
we don't, and every year, you know, we'll have people who've been around 5 or 6 years who notice somebody who's newer, who's a little flaky, and they're like, what are we going to do? Are we going to boot them? And I'm like, wait 2 years. They're not going to come back. They're not going to enjoy it. It's not enjoyable for them. I promise. We don't have people who stay in camp 5, 6, 7 years who don't pull their weight.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. And I'd say to the help desk, and to Gerald's point, we really, everyone has bad days. Sometimes people get sick. Sometimes people get, dehydrated, whatever it may be. We're all bound to miss something. And we do want to stand each other up and help each other when we do have a down day. But if there's a person that specifically misses strike every year for the same, quote, good reason, then they're clearly not a good fit for the camp. And we just have to have a conversation with them about that as soon as we're all back home. It's really as simple as that. Direct communication, and as Marisa said, nonviolent communication is really important here and for all of us. So we just have to focus on that.
I think GOD's point there around thinking of ourselves as a team is really important, right? Like, if somebody is, for whatever reason, they've got a good reason that they need to rush home to deal with something, and they treat them so they're sitting there and like, I'm a member of the team and like, this sucks, but I have to go deal with this thing. That's very different than somebody who, to some extent, is basically saying, actually, like, I'm going to let you guys all be the team, and I got to go because I like, something like wildly preventable, or I just want to be a flake.
Right.
And I think you can usually sense like when that person is pulling as part of the team or when they're pulling against the team. And if you notice that somebody's consistently kind of pulling against the team, that's when you have a conversation about it.
Marisa, I just saw your comment. We kind of had the same thing. School is right at Burning Man, right? So our rule is that if you can't do strike because you have kids, et cetera, and you're contributing before the event, during build days or during work days, pre-burn, and you're on build team, but you're not on strike team, there's always a way around it. It's just having the conversations ahead of time and not just like, hey guys, I'm out, sorry, didn't tell you, gotta go, because that's a different conversation. Well, thank you everybody who attended the meeting today. We greatly appreciate it. Charles did put all of our names in the chat. We appreciate every single one of you. Charles, Marisa, Dakota, Gerald, thank you all for being here with me. Hope everybody enjoyed the day, and we hope to see you at the next one. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
So much for inviting us. This is awesome.
Absolutely. It's good to have everybody.